for this week, we're going to be thinking about the global expansion of Christianity through the activity of missionaries from European and United States contexts and how they interact with local populations. One of the important ways to understand the development of global mission is to situate it within modernity itself. So one of the manifestations of modernity is it helps to create global realities, that distances themselves are reduced because of various productions of modernity. So one aspect of that is the development of global empires, whether it's the British Empire, imperial activity under the French, other European entities like the Germans, the Belgians, the Italians, all creating their own colonies in places like Asia and Africa. And then, of course, the United States making a turn towards having a colonial reach as we move from the 19th into 20th centuries in places like Puerto Rico, Cuba, Pacific Islands like Hawaii, the Philippines, and so forth. One of the things that global empires need is to shrink distance so that communication, trade, other activities can occur within the operations of an empire. And so here, empires really lean on technological developments to help make this possible. And so one of the things we could think about modernity in terms of is the rapid advances in various forms of technologies, whether it is via transportation with things like steamboats and locomotives that make ocean travel and travel across great distances more possible, or new developments in communication technology like the telegraph, which allows rapid communication faster than mail services could reach. Those technologies are in service to global empires and colonial enterprises, but they also help make mission activity possible. That's easier and faster to reach places where people have not yet been converted to Christianity, or at least the kind of Christianity being offered. As well, certain responses to modernity within Christian circles lead to reading the Bible, especially the New Testament, regarding the command to preach the gospel to the ends of the earth, the so-called Great Commission at the end of the Gospel of Matthew. In a sense that Christ would not return until literally every people group on earth had heard the gospel of Jesus Christ. While that doesn't seem to be actually an explicit biblical teaching, it becomes a strong operating assumption in 19th century Protestant Christianity. And so we have then here this various ways in which modernity is producing conditions that make global mission feasible and attractive. One of the primary areas where mission activity occurs is in the region of Africa. And even here, productions of modernity accelerate the missionary move into portions of Africa. Now remember, obviously first, Christianity has been in Africa from the beginning. Whether we're talking about Philip and the Ethiopian eunuch, early Christianity in Egypt, the vibrant Christianity of North Africa, Christianity found the kingdoms of Nubia, it's been there. We can also think about Christian mission activity in places like the Kingdom of the Congo in the 15th and 16th century under Roman Catholicism. But there is certainly an acceleration of missionary activity, especially in Sub-Saharan Africa, in the late 18th and really moving rapidly in the 19th century. Part of this is two elements. One is abolition of slavery, which is rooted on notions of the rights of individuals to freedom, which is a very Enlightenment and modern articulation about the human person, and ideas about self-determination, that what we would call the Back to Africa movement, where freed, formerly enslaved peoples of African descent discerned that in places like the United States or in parts of the Caribbean, even if they were free, they were still living within racist structures. And so true freedom would only be found by self-determination of independent Black communities. And sometimes it was determined that those places could only exist back in Africa. And so this notion about self-determination and creating newly formed body politics is also part of participating in various ideas that modernity offers. One of the things then that abolitionists take up the idea of, white abolitionists primarily, is that freed slaves ought to return to Africa because of the harmful conditions of racism in other places. So we have missions to Sierra Leone in West Africa by the Church Missionary Society, also known as CMS, that when British naval ships, CMS is a Church of England missionary society, when British naval ships intercepted slave ships that were carrying illegal slave cargo, the people on board were liberated, but instead of being repatriated to wherever their people lived in Africa, they were brought to the British colony of Sierra Leone. And so kind of a new community of the liberated is established there. Similarly, in Liberia, which was established under American influence, the African Colonization Society does the very same thing. So people who've been liberated from slavery in the United States, rather than staying in the United States, are then brought to Liberia and help to establish new communities there. And the idea here is that ex-slaves who were Christian would return to Africa and be forces for a Christianizing of Africa that also within a white set of assumptions will be a civilizing force for Africa as well. So here's another aspect of modernity, is racialized thinking that assumes that there are hierarchies of people. White people sit at the top, and people of color sit below that in various perhaps ranked orders. But every white Christian assumed that Africa was an inferior place in need of enlightenment or civilization that Christianity could uniquely bring. And that liberated Black Christians, whether they're from the Caribbean or from the Americas or from somewhere else, would be excellent agents for bringing that about. This all runs into a lot of friction in a way. White Protestant missionaries who find themselves in West Africa have to grapple with the fact that slavery itself was a reality in West African societies, also in East African societies. This is not surprising because enslavement as a practice is transhistorical and cuts across many contexts. The problem in the 19th century was the ways in which capitalism is accelerating enslavement for the economic benefit of one group over another and creating racialized hierarchies. Slave communities, and the communities of those who've been liberated from slavery, often find Christianity to be very appealing. And it tends to be that group, which is of a lower status in whatever culture they're in, makes then Christianity the religion of the underclass as well. What we have then is the creation of what scholars call these liberated communities or formerly enslaved communities in places like Sierra Leone and its capital of Freetown, where between 1808 and 1835, about 60,000 liberated Africans, those who have been on slave ships, are liberated and then simply deposited in Freetown. This is the group that's most responsive to the missionary efforts of the Church Missionary Society. And a similar dynamic unfolds in places like Liberia with its capital of Monrovia, which creates an interesting dynamic because the indigenous peoples of either Sierra Leone or Liberia are not as responsive to the message of the gospel. And often it's the coastline that is being settled or repopulated by these liberated communities, and the interiors are of a different composition and response to what's happening along the coast. So I hope this complicates part of the story of mission. It's not just like Protestant missionaries from Europe or the United States simply appear in Africa and start preaching the gospel. There's already this very complex interaction between communities on the ground. I hope this will now set us up for the next video, exploring a more detailed mission. We're going to first look at mission in a West African context, and then in a later video, we're going to look at mission in a Central African context.